With a divided U.S. Congress, former President Donald Trump in campaign mode and allowed back on Twitter, what can we expect for the next 2 years in U.S. politics? Hello, I'm Arnold Knight, and this is The Heat. It's become a sort of tradition involving U.S. presidents recently. The last 2 years of their term are a political stalemate with a divided Congress. Come January, Republicans will control the House of Representatives, while Democrats will retain control of the United States Senate. And the question is, can there be any legislative progress? And Donald Trump has announced he will run for president in 2024. Will another Republican challenge him? To answer those questions, let's bring in our panelists. Rina Shah is a political analyst and current affairs commentator, joining us here in Washington, D.C. Also in D.C., Eleanor Clift is a political columnist for the Daily Beast. Melik Abdul is a Republican strategist, also based in D.C. And from New York, Erin Mattei is the host of the Pushback with Erin Mattei at the Grayzone. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Eleanor Clift, let me start with you. It's taken a few days, but we now know that the House of Representatives in the U.S. Congress will be controlled by Republicans, and as I pointed out, power will be divided. The Democrats retain control of the United States Senate. So how do you see the next 2 years unfold? Are we going to see any kind of legislative progress being made, or is it going to be gridlock?
Well, the Republicans campaigned on inflation and crime, and if elected, they said they would do something about those issues. But right out of the box, as soon as the House majority was confirmed, there was a press conference of the incoming chair of the House Oversight Committee and one of the more raucous members of the Congress, Jim Jordan, basically saying that they would be focusing on investigating Hunter Biden and looking for links between Hunter Biden and his father and whether President Biden is involved in some sort of money laundering or trafficking. They want to do investigations, and they have subpoena power, and I think this is the direction they're going to go. I haven't given up on legislation completely. I think there could be some attempts to get some legislation started in the Senate, where the Democrats have control, but there are a number of Republicans who see the future of the party and getting things done and not necessarily investigating the opposition. So I think potentially immigration reform is on the table, but it will be tough to get anything done except the necessary matters of governing, like raising the debt ceiling so we pay our bills, and handling some update of the Electoral Reform Count Act so that what happened on January 6th can't happen again in 2024.
Erin Mattei, as Eleanor just told us, the Republicans have already said that there are going to be hearings, there are going to be investigations into President Biden's role in his son Hunter Biden's business affairs, and hearings on the infamous Hunter Biden laptop, which we were initially told was a Russian disinformation campaign. Do you think the next 2 years is going to be preoccupied with this kind of activity in Congress?
Yes, I do. Unfortunately, that's been the template set by most recent years. We have to remember that Democrats, they centered investigations into Trump, especially these fake allegations that he was a Russian asset, which we subsequently learned were basically concocted by Hillary Clinton's campaign, who even paid for Christopher Steele to produce a dossier full of fiction pushing that narrative, which then occupied the country for more than 2 years. So I'm not surprised at all to see Republicans following suit with investigations of their own. I don't think what Hunter Biden did when it comes to his dealings in Ukraine or China are really different than the standard corruption we see in Washington. But I understand why Republicans want to get some mileage out of that, especially after what they've gone through for the last few years. But I think they ultimately face a problem in that they have still at the top of their party, among their base, Donald Trump, who's just not very popular, who has lost several elections now. Mm-hmm. And whatever they uncover about Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, I don't think will make up for that.
One other thing, Aaron, is that we have seen hearings into the events of January 6th. Most of those hearings, of course, were driven largely by Democrats. What happens now? Do those hearings just come to an end?
Yeah, well, the committee is going to be shut down because Republicans, when they control the House, are not going to renew it. But I think the committee will make some referrals to the Justice Department if they have them. And that was the whole point of this January 6th committee, was just basically to try to convince the Justice Department to bring charges against Trump. And the answer to that has become in the form of this new special counsel, which Merrick Garland just announced, looking into both Trump's role in January 6th and also his handling of the documents at Mar-a-Lago. So, in short, the Trump circus will go on because now we have a special counsel essentially doing what the January 6th committee had just been doing for the last 2 years.
Rina Shah, we have talked about this before, and you have made the point that the parties need to put their differences aside, end their squabbles, find common ground, and act on behalf of the voters, the American people. But given the very polarized political climate that we see right now, is that realistic?
Well, I've also made the point on this program a couple of times that we live in a representative democracy, and it's also a constitutional republic, many experts argue. So we have a real issue here of civic illiteracy. People don't quite understand what we've got. So when we talk about preserving it or making it better, like our founders wanted, striving towards a more perfect union, what does that really mean? And in this era, it really means very vastly different things to Democrats and Republicans. That's very obvious. Now, look around and we'll see one thing that's really quite apparent is that Republicans want to continue to engage in culture wars. That, I think, is a real detriment to the party's future, because what we see in this past midterm elections is that young voters delivered this election. American women delivered this election. We're seeing a growing swath of independent voters throughout the country. We're talking coast to coast, not just in these incredibly important swing states. So as we move towards 2024, there has to be some sort of understanding by at least one of the major two parties of how to either continue to keep these two demographics deeply engaged and directly cater to them, or to find a way to engage new people into the system. I don't know that either party is doing that well. So I'll say this. There's a real moment here for the Republicans when they take the House in January to do two good things. And I talk about two good areas, actually, when I mean two good things. I talk about criminal justice reform, and I talk about immigration. The phrase comprehensive immigration reform has never really been lost from the American consciousness. It's because we still have a very broken system. These are two subject areas in which Republicans can lead the way, but I'm hearing very little on that right now. So it remains yet to be seen what substance the Republicans want to bring the American public. It seems they want to continue to engage in grievance politics and to further this notion that Democrats are really the culprits of eroding the American way.
Melik Abdul, as Rina points out, the Republicans are intent on continuing, as she pointed out, the culture wars. And this is despite the fact that they didn't do as well as they'd expected in the midterm elections. And if we look at some of the other things, and according to exit polls, a third of voters in the midterm saw soaring inflation as one of the main issues in the election. 7 out of 10 voters said they were dissatisfied or angry with the state of the country. We know that President Biden's approval ratings are very low. Yet the election was very tight. What was wrong with the Republican messaging? Did they get the issues wrong?
I don't think that the Republican Party actually got the issues wrong. It was a much larger issue than Donald Trump or Mitch McConnell. I think there was a different mood in the country. For all intents and purposes, Republicans now seem poised to have the same number of seats that Democrats have as far as the majority. Democrats have about 222 seats now. Republicans seem poised to have 222 seats. I think there were some miscalculations. There were a lot of projections that were out there as far as what the Republican Party would do. And these were things that Republicans, just not Republicans themselves, were saying. But you had places like the Rear Clear Politics and 538 and some of those others who were given those very hefty projections as far as Republicans win. But I don't think that Republican Party itself is focused on those culture wars. Even Ron DeSantis, someone who I would argue is the culture war conservative. Look how well he did in the state of Florida, even campaigning on those quote unquote culture war issues. Brian Kemp, Mike DeWine. You saw Greg Abbott in Florida beating Beto O'Rourke. So there are things that Republicans are doing that's not just focused on the culture war issues, and a lot of those are happening, what we're seeing from governors. But there's work that I expect Republicans to do. I don't expect Republicans to give Joe Biden any real wins, because unfortunately our system is set up in that way. That's not what happens when there's a different party in power. But I think that Republicans can play ball around things like infrastructure and some of those other things. But real big legislation, I don't expect them to play ball at all.
Yeah, but Melik, did they come up with any kind of strong policies that they could sell to the electorate?
I don't think that's the role. That's not the role of the party not in power. They had to actually make Joe Biden, or the Democrats, if you will, seem as if they were not great for the American people, that they were unacceptable. And as far as the House is concerned, they seem to have made that argument. But the Republican Party is pretty limited in what it can do, in the same way that Democrats were when Donald Trump was in office. They can call investigations and subpoena people and things like that. But at the end of the day, any bill that they push can actually be vetoed by the President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Eleanor Clift, Aaron Maté was making the point a moment ago that Donald Trump has lost a bit of the support that he has enjoyed in the past. But he did make that announcement in Florida that he will be running in 2024. And he has that ability to suck the political oxygen out of the air. Do you think we're going to see that happen in the next 2 years?
I think you see the media really rethinking how they're going to cover him. You're not going to see every rally covered from beginning to end. Even Fox News didn't carry his announcement rally completely. They drifted away from it to offer some analysis. And he doesn't have the elites of the party with him, the elites in the media. Fox News and the right-wing media lost their enthusiasm. The New York Post has made a newspaper that is owned by Rupert Murdoch and always has been favorable to Trump. They are basically mocking his bid to run again. They didn't mind all of the things that he did that were outrageous during his 4 years in office, but including inciting the insurrection on January 6th. But they can't stand his losing. And Trump can't stand being a loser, being called a loser. So I think you're going to have this, battle of the titans going on for the next 2 years. And Trump's election bid is seen in part as an effort to try to insulate himself from the potential indictments that could be coming. So I don't think that the voters want to be, the vast majority of voters have lost any confidence in or trust in the Trump cult. And the American voters sent the message that they don't like extremism. That's what lost at the polls. And Trump embodies extremism. So I think, there'll be an effort to isolate him among Republicans, but all the candidates potentially jumping into a presidential race with him could produce the same result as 2016, because Trump has a strong hold on 30% of the Republican electorate. And if you have 6, 8, 10 other candidates divvying up the rest, and you have winner-take-all primaries, Trump could well be the nominee. So I think everyone talking about him has got to factor in that however much he seems diminished after the midterms, he still remains a force in American politics.
Rina, I know you're a great fan of Donald Trump, but could he be the next nominee? And one other thing, when you look at the Republican legislative agenda, whatever that may be, how much impact will Trump have on that? Will Congress people be looking to Trump to see what he wants?
Well, as somebody who's been a political professional for nearly 2 decades, I don't like any losers. So somebody who's been twice impeached and wasn't able to win a second term, I don't think that's somebody who should be running again. I definitely don't think a third time's a charm for Donald Trump. The best thing he could do is go in peace and in silence and preserve whatever legacy he thinks his administration had. I mean, there were a number of wins. His former vice president, Mike Pence, is out there, hawking a book right now, talking about how he's still proud of the many wins that the Trump administration had. So that's no small thing. There are many Americans who still think that. Would they vote for Trump again? That's the real question. I think there's a real chance that Trump could emerge victorious if the GOP primary field is crowded again. I think that's a real big problem for the Republican Party, is that you've got all these people like a Mike Pompeo, a new governor from Virginia like Glenn Youngkin. You've got former governor of South Carolina, Nikki Haley. All these people are potential contenders. But let's not forget what happened in 2016. A packed field produced a Donald Trump as a presumptive nominee, and then again, your candidate. So
right, Rina,
that's a real issue.
Yeah, Rina, what about the Trump base, sometimes referred to as MAGA Republicans in a reference to making America great again? How strong are they?
Look, I've never been one to discount the MAGA base. I think it's a movement. I think it's one to be taken seriously. I do think it's quite dangerous after January 6th, because we know that a lot of those people have been, given in to some of the most extremist rhetoric that led to political violence on January 6th, 2021 at our U.S. Capitol. Again, these people have turned into our domestic terrorists. These are fellow Americans amongst us. They were radicalized, in fact, by the former president himself. And so there's, to me, no debating there. But there are Americans who want to relitigate the 2020 election and who want to debate that very point about the president having radicalized fellow Republicans. But I will tell you this, there is an entryway for somebody new to come through and have some of the really good policy points that Trump perhaps put out in his administration's time. And that person remains yet to be seen. Is it Governor DeSantis? I think that governor has the strongest chance at this point of mounting a serious ground game against the former president. But truly, it's up to the Democrats to continue pointing the finger at Republicans and how absurd they look. And it's for Trump to really read the room and see that the MAGA base is, in fact, shrinking. There's empirical data to show that.
Okay. Aaron Mattei, Elon Musk ran his own poll on Twitter this week, and he asked subscribers whether Trump should be reinstated on that social media platform. More than 13 million people voted, and by a narrow majority, they support Trump being back on Twitter. What did you make of that exercise in democracy, and why are liberals so incensed at the fact that Trump will be back on Twitter?
Well, the official reason that liberals are upset about Trump returning is that he did use Twitter to incite January 6th, and January 6th did result in violence. So they're understandably concerned that Trump will incite more violence. I believe in free speech, though, so I do believe that Trump should be allowed to spread his deranged views about the election, just as I believe that Adam Schiff should be allowed to spread his deranged conspiracy theories that Trump is a Russian asset. Either you believe in free speech or you don't. And unfortunately, it's become a tendency among the liberal side of U.S. politics in recent years to favor censoring views you don't like and to dismiss them, in the case of the Hunter Biden laptop, for example, as a Russian operation, even though that allegation was completely fallacious. That was a real laptop from Hunter Biden. So that's just unfortunately part of a trend. I don't think Twitter, though, is real life. And I do think that if Trump is the nominee in 2024, I don't think he'll replicate the success he had on Twitter and in 2016, because recall in 2016, he was pretending to be an outsider and he was challenging a career insider in Hillary Clinton, who had a lot of unpopularity among people who she needed to win over to win. And so Trump got very lucky in 2016 because he hadn't been in office yet. But once he came to office, after promising to drain the swamp, he only deepened the swamp. And I think independent-minded voters will certainly remember that, along with all of his other, antics, including January 6th, if he's the nominee in 2024.
But he's already, Aaron, framing his candidacy in the very same way, telling his supporters that, look, it's rigged, and I'm here to stop what's going on.
Yes, and that was very effective in 2016 when he said, I know it's rigged because I take advantage of it. I cheat on my taxes. I buy off politicians. And that honesty was seen as very refreshing to people, especially when he was up against someone like Hillary Clinton, who to some people represented the kind of beltway corruption that Donald Trump was claiming that he was against. But what happened when Trump came to office? He appointed a cabinet full of billionaires. One of his biggest accomplishments was the tax cut, which disproportionately favored the ultra wealthy. So Trump had a chance in office, and he chose to continue the same policies that he claimed to be against.
Melik Abdul, the Wall Street Journal had a piece in which it made the case that neither Biden nor Trump should run. It points to a poll showing that 65% of Americans want neither Biden nor Trump. In fact, this is what the Republican governor of the state of New Hampshire had to say. Let's listen to him.
I got a great policy for the Republican Party. Let's stop supporting crazy, unelectable candidates in our primaries and start getting behind winners that can close the deal in November.
So, Melik, what do you make of that? I mean, Sununu was, of course, talking about Republican candidates, but is it time for new, younger leadership across the board in the country?
Sure, absolutely. And the good thing about Nancy Pelosi is that she actually did that, seem as if she's getting ready to pass the baton. It's always time. I think that applies on the Republican side with Mitch McConnell. I would like to see someone younger. I would like to see a woman in a senior leadership position in the Senate and as well as the House. So I think that those things are important. As far as Donald Trump and his role in the Republican Party, I think that the Republican primary is Donald Trump's for the taking. I think we should always reject, especially using our media spaces, we should reject comparing any American to domestic terrorism that the FBI itself hasn't actually said is a domestic terrorist. I think that's very hot, that's very provocative language, that's very similar to what Joe Biden did during this recent campaign when he talked about the extremism in the Republican Party. I believe I'm probably the only former Democrat on the panel who voted for Donald Trump twice. And I can say that although I don't consider myself a member of the MAGA base, the more that I hear from people, the establishment and others out there who are trying to characterize what the 74 million of us who voted for Donald Trump, the people out there who are trying to characterize us as extremists or domestic terrorists or whatever it is, or whatever insult that they would like to use.
All right,
this is something that doesn't make me turn away from Donald Trump. Not at all.
Let me get a quick response from Rina on that issue of domestic terrorism. Rina, if you could be brief, please.
Yeah, no. It's really, really important, Melik. I was not calling Donald Trump's voters domestic terrorists. I'm talking about the very people that physically attacked the Capitol building on January 6, 2021. We have to be very clear about that. And they are domestic terrorists. What else would you call people that physically attack, violently attack, kill other people, use weapons? That's domestic terrorism.
Who killed someone on January 6th? Who killed someone on January 6th? The only person that was killed on January 6th was Ashley Babbitt.
You know, that's not a debate I'm willing to have here.
Not true. The only person
it is factually true, and that the facts are inconvenient to you, and I'm sorry about that.
Okay. I need to move on.
I was not calling Trump's vote.
All right. I need to move on to Eleanor. Eleanor, one other big issue I want to talk about, and that is United States support for Ukraine. Is the Biden administration going to be able to sustain the kinds of support that it has been giving Ukraine over the past year or so? We do know that the purse strings are held by Congress, and already we've heard Republicans say that, look, the blank check is, the days of the blank check are over.
Well, I would add as a footnote to the previous conversation that the Justice Department has prosecuted, I think, 938 or 968 people who breached the Capitol on January 6th. So the people are being held to account for that day. As far as Ukraine is concerned, I think the incoming House Republicans have expressed real displeasure with the ongoing aid from the United States to Ukraine. And McCarthy, the presumptive speaker, said the free blank check would end. But I think President Biden has already addressed this in public, and he said he doesn't think that the Republicans have a majority within their own caucus to halt aid to Ukraine. But I think it increases the pressure to try to find a negotiated settlement, because those checks will not keep coming from this House Republican, and they have the power of the purse. That's where the spending originates, in the House.
Yeah. Aaron Mate, what are your thoughts on continued support for Ukraine? In fact, you wrote a piece on Substack in which you pointed out that there is support among the US military for a negotiated solution and not among US politicians, not among the civilian leadership in government, which actually is not something that we see very often.
Can I say quickly on January 6th, I think it's fair to call the people there rioters, but not domestic terrorists. I don't think the QAnon shaman and the people with them are domestic terrorists. They staged a riot, and they should be held accountable for that, but that's not domestic terrorism. Yeah. On Ukraine, yes, we're in a very strange situation right now. As CNN recently noted, that the Pentagon is more in favor of diplomacy than the diplomats, than Antony Blinken and other State Department officials. And the personification of that came from General Mark Milley, the top U.S. military officer, calling recently for diplomacy and saying that, in his opinion, Ukraine's basically won all it can on the battlefield, and now it's the time to consolidate its gains in diplomacy. Why is Milley calling for talks with Russia but not diplomats? Well, that speaks to the fact that I think Milley knows where this is headed if no peace settlement is reached. It could drag the world into a world war, as we recently saw with that scare of missiles being launched into Poland, and some U.S. officials, along with Ukraine, initially accusing Russia, but then having to admit that actually these missiles came from Ukraine. And so Milley, I think, sees the dangers of that, sees the fact that Ukraine's forces, despite their victories, have suffered huge losses, also sees that the U.S. is running out of weapons to give Ukraine. That is a concern that's been voiced by some military officials. So all this leads to a situation where Milley is calling for diplomacy, but ideologues in the State Department who are not driven, I think, by concern for Ukrainians, but just an effort to bleed Russia as much as they can, want to keep this war going. And so I'm hoping personally that saner heads in the Pentagon will prevail.
Rina Shah, I want to get, sorry, you want to say something?
Can I interject there for a minute? This is a good cop, bad cop. Somebody has got to be out there putting the pressure on Zelensky, and the president and the Secretary of State are saying there's no deal without Ukraine. I mean, it's their country; they have to be in on the deal. So it's delicate maneuvering, and I think both aspects of the administration are pushing in the same direction in different ways.
Right, Rina Shah.
Let me say quickly that actually hasn't been the policy of no Ukraine without Ukraine, because earlier this year there were talks between Ukraine and Russia in March and April, and we know from sources close to Zelensky that Boris Johnson, back when he was the Prime Minister of Britain, came over and told Zelensky, don't make a deal with Russia, we're not going to have your back if you make peace with Russia. We want to see this war continue. So this claim that Biden wants to let Ukraine make decisions,
that hasn't been confirmed in this country.
Okay, we have to leave it there. Rina, my apologies to you. I was hoping to get back to you on the immigration question, but we have run out of time. Thank you to all of you for being on the show. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.